It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the ViewSonic XG2703-GS. The OSD is controlled by pressable buttons that run along the bottom edge of the right bezel. There are some little green painted button labels there, and the buttons themselves are found at the back of the monitor. I'm not sure if you can see that very well on the video, but they just run along there. The first button, if you press that on its own, you can see it has a little G symbol there. These are the various gaming presets. The first two are basically customizable presets, fully customizable presets, which will allow you to have two different custom presets, sets of settings. The others are sort of predetermined presets with making various different changes to the image and sometimes restricting some of the options that are available to you on the OSD. I'll go on to this in a little bit. 2 FPS modes, RTS, MOBA and off. And as per the review, I'd recommend you just leave these off if you want an accurate and, in my view, very appealing image. Second button down, in fact any of these buttons that just look like they've got a little diamond marker, if you press them on their own it brings up a little quick menu, and you can see that what each button does. You can quickly change the contrast and brightness. You can quickly change the input of the monitor, switch between HDMI and DisplayPort, and there's the main menu and an exit button, and also a power button. The power LED of the monitor is quite bright and in my view a little bit distracting, but fortunately you can turn it off as I've done there. I'll show you that when I get to that section of the menu, but it's basically a long bar down there, and it also lights up this little plastic sort of screen bit here. It's pretty bright, so I've got that switched off for my own enjoyment. The main menu is set out in quite a nice way. Personally, I prefer having a joystick to control the menu. You can see this is just controlled by buttons there. It doesn't have a jog button or a joystick, which I find a bit more intuitive, but never mind. There's an input select option there, audio adjust, which allows you to change the volume of the integrated speakers or anything connected to the 3.5mm audio jack, or mute that. There is view mode, and this has the full range of presets available on the monitor. There's standard, which I'm using at the moment, and that has some settings which are greyed out. ULMB, ultra low motion blur, which is only available in 120 Hz, 100 Hz or 85 Hz, and I've got the monitor running at 165 Hz at the moment, so that's why that's greyed out. I mean, I could set everything up to enable that, but it'll take a lot of fiddling about, so I'm not going to do that right now. There's also a pulse width setting, which you can set between 0 and 100 in increments of 1, and that's explored in the review. It's a dark boost setting, and this is basically like BenQ's black equalizer. It modifies the gamma curve to increase the level of detail in dark scenes. It's quite a bright room here at the moment, so I'm not sure how obvious this will be, but if I just open one of my favourite websites for tweaking monitors, Lagom, I appreciate there's lots of glare because it's a bright room and it's not very easy to see this, but hopefully you'll at least be able to see that these are the 3 different levels here: level 1, level 2, level 3. I've got it off at the moment. If I turn dark boost onto level 1, you can see hopefully that those squares all got a little brighter. Level 2, they got brighter again, and level 3 brighter again. So what that's doing is it would increase the visibility of sort of enemies and dark areas of games and stuff, but on the negative side, things are configured on this monitor, or at least are configured as per our test settings in an accurate way. So as the game developers intend it to look, more or less. So this kind of makes things look a bit artificial. It gives things a bit of a flooded look in dark areas, reveals details which were never actually meant to be revealed. So really it's for a competitive edge, this setting. There's adaptive contrast, and this is not like a normal dynamic contrast setting. Again, it's explored in the review. I'll just turn it on, and you can see they lighten up much. It's pretty much like a sort of dynamic dark boost setting, is how I'd think of it. It changes the gamma handling of the monitor, but it doesn't actually adjust, or doesn't noticeably adjust the backlight brightness. So it's not like a normal dynamic contrast mode. It's sort of like a dynamic dark boost setting, really. So if the monitor was displaying lots of bright stuff, it would try and adjust the gamma curve to give good distinctions between the bright shades, whereas if it's displaying lots of dark content, as it is at the moment, it'll try and adjust the gamma curve to make them more distinct, much like dark boost. It's a blue light filter, and that's greyed out at the moment because of the colour settings and colour adjusted I'm using at the moment, so I'll come on to that in a little bit. Response time, there are 3 different response time settings: standard, advanced and ultra fast. I use advanced in the review. I'd recommend using that. There's a recall option as well, which will just reset all of this to the factory default. So if occasionally if you change to ULMB and back, or change certain other settings, you might notice some of these settings are greyed out for no apparent reason, like response time. Just press recall and it'll reset your brightness, which isn't one of the settings labelled here, but and the contrast, I believe, and everything else here will also be reset. But importantly, those things that are greyed out will reappear, hopefully. They will, don't worry. Game, so these are the game presets which I showed you earlier with that G at the top of the monitor there. Gamer 1 and Gamer 2 are basically the fully adjustable ones. FPS 1, you can see that these sub options are very much like standard with Gamer 1 and Gamer 2, whereas on FPS they disappear. And again, none of these presets sort of oversaturate, make the image just look frankly quite ugly, mess up the gamma. I mean, by all means have a fiddle with them, but if you want the image to look like the game developers intended, don't use these, basically. If you want to use them, just use the customizable ones. There's also movie, which, just because it says movie, again, I wouldn't recommend using it for movies. It's, actually, to be honest, it's not one of the, it's a decent enough preset overall, but you just don't get the same flexibility you get in other presets, and the same with web as well. So really I'd just stick with standard or the customizable gaming ones 1 and 2. And you can see now that the blue light filter is available. That's simply because the monitor's reset my colour adjust settings for me. So this is a low blue light setting. 0 means it's off, and you can adjust that in increments of 1 all the way up to 100 with a strengthening blue light, a strengthening low blue light effect, or an ever increasing filter strength. So it basically decreases the blue colour channels. Things look warmer. The level of blue light emitted from the monitor is significantly decreased, and that's good for relaxing viewing, especially in the evening or another time when before you're going to go to bed, when you don't want to sort of excite your body and mess up your hormones with all of this blue light. It's a physiological thing. You should avoid blue light before bed. So I'll just put that back to 0 and then move on to the colour adjust menu. There are various settings here that you'd expect to see, like contrast and brightness. Brightness of 100 is actually very bright. Might not seem that way on the video, you can't really judge this on the video, but I'm just going to decrease that to my preferred setting. Saturation, you can increase or decrease the saturation. This is much like sort of a hardware version of, or a monitor version of NVIDIA's digital vibrancy control. 100 will give you the most accurate shade reproduction and the best shade range. If you increase this beyond that, colours are basically pulled towards the edge of the gamut and therefore look more saturated, but the colour gamut itself doesn't change, so you reduce the shade variety. And if you decrease that below 100, I don't know why you'd want to do that, saturation, as you'd imagine, just decreases. There are 6-axis colour control, so you can change red, green, blue, cyan, magenta and yellow. These are offset controls rather than gain controls. If you don't know what that means, just don't bother, to be honest, just don't bother fiddling with these. I know some people like to fine-tune this kind of thing, and especially if they're into design work and stuff, that's really what these are for. There are various colour temperature settings, native, which is a factory default, sRGB, bluish, warm, user colour. Again, these are explored in the review. Warm is like a low blue light setting as well, if you can't be bothered to sort of ramp up the low blue light filter, the blue light filter, sorry. And there are user colour settings which allow you to change the red, green and blue gain. So this is the usual red, green and blue colour channel alteration you'd get on a monitor, and these are sort of the important one to focus on. So you can see, as per the review, I've made various changes to the colour channels. You can change the input range, the signal dynamic range. Automatic will automatically select based on the source you're using, or there's full range or limited range. So PC users should be aiming to use full range, and I think most games consoles nowadays full range is generally the preferred setting. For some, limited range would be the preferred setting, but if you leave it on auto, it should in theory adjust the range of the monitor based on your source. So that's quite a nice little feature. There are also some gamma settings. You can change that between 1.8 and 2.6 in increments of 0.2. Again, the 2.2 is the default, and that's sort of where most users will be aiming. There's manual image adjust. This has an overclocking feature, which allows you to set the monitor to 165 Hz rather than the native, which is 144 Hz. It's a 144 Hz panel and would need to be overclocked to 165 Hz. And as per the review, I had no issues at all running it at 165 Hz, and I did that for most of the review. So basically it'll unlock 165 Hz if you select that on the menu and then let the monitor restart. There's scaling mode, and this only applies really to non-native resolutions, and the monitor doesn't actually have a scaler for DisplayPort because it's a G-Sync monitor, and like all G-Sync monitors, the G-Sync module replaces a lot of the, well, all of the scaling capabilities of the monitor, in fact. So the graphics card would actually be handling the scaling. However, if you've got the monitor connected via HDMI, for example to a games console or to anything else, including a PC, and you want to be running full HD. Now, I appreciate some people might want to run full HD because they're finding a game a bit demanding for 2560 by 1440. So you can actually have HDMI and DisplayPort connected up to the computer and the monitor at the same time, as I have here. Then you can just select HDMI as the input. As mentioned in the review, if you're using non-native resolutions, it gives you a slightly different image characteristic. It doesn't have the same native clarity that you'd get on a full HD model that's 27 inches, for example. But it certainly isn't as bad as a lot of models I've tested. So if you would like to keep things looking exactly sort of pixel perfect, so to speak, without any sort of interpolation, softening process, you can select 1:1, and that gives you a black border around the screen instead. So you can see that the image is quite small, it's in the centre of the display, but it has all of the native clarity you'd expect from full HD, and indeed the native clarity you'd expect from Full HD on a smaller monitor than 27 inches. It's, so that's options there if you want to use it. There's also a fixed aspect ratio or setting, which doesn't apply to this because it's a 16:9 resolution, but if I'd selected something else, that would make a difference. So I'm going to change the monitor back to its native resolution now. Next up there is a setup menu, and that has a range of different options. You can change the language that the OSD is displayed in. There's a resolution notice, which you might have seen briefly when I was displaying the non-native resolution before, which just reminds you you're running a non-native resolution and your image quality might suffer. So you can turn that on or off. Information, which can also be accessed quickly by, when you've gone into the menu, pressing that icon there, information. This shows you the current resolution, the maximum refresh rate of the monitor, the fact that it's running in NVIDIA G-Sync or whatever other mode it's running at. So it could say ULMB or normal, depending on what mode you're actually running at. The model number, which is something ViewSonic used to identify the model. And just a reminder of ViewSonic's website in case you couldn't work out that it's viewsonic.com. You can change the OSD timeout period in seconds, which is the length of time that the OSD will be displayed on the screen before automatically disappearing. 5 seconds if you're really quick at using the OSD, or like me if you're trying to record a video and don't want it to disappear on you automatically, set it to 60. You can change the OSD so it has a transparency effect, which actually is quite a strong transparency effect. It makes it kind of difficult to read things, so not actually very practical at all. And there's a power indicator, which I mentioned towards the start of the video. By default this is set to auto, and what that means is the power indicator actually changes colour depending on the content being displayed on the screen. It doesn't really, or I haven't noticed it showing any super saturated colours, but if I change my desktop background, you'll see now it's kind of like slightly warmer, sort of reddish pink colour. I don't know how to look on the video, but that's because I've just changed my background to strawberries. And then I've got this background with a frog and some nice greenery, so it's kind of displaying a sort of almost sort of greeny colour of sorts. And this is obviously a very snowy background, so it's quite a nice icy white that it's displaying there. I think you get the idea. I don't have to go through any more things like that, but I find the power LED quite bright and distracting, especially in these sort of automatic settings. I also find, I can't capture it on the camera I don't think, but when you move your eyes in a certain way or just kind of glance at the power LED, you often see it split into its 3 respective components, so you can see kind of stripes of red, green and blue separately, which I find a bit odd and distracting, so I tend to either have it off or set to one of the fixed colours. So the fixed colours, you can either set it to red or you can have it set to green, very NVIDIA colour that is, or you can have it set to blue, so it might just depend on your other LEDs you've got, if you've got some case LEDs on your PC. So, but of course you can just leave it off as I usually do, if you prefer. Power standby USB charging does exactly what you'd expect it to do. It allows you to enable charging of USB devices even when the monitor is on standby, or standby also means if it's switched off with the power button but not switched off at the wall. And even if you're not actually charging anything actively, that will increase your standby power consumption slightly, which is why it's set to off by default. Eco mode has various different settings which adjust the brightness to various preset values. And once you enable one of these settings, annoyingly it completely wipes out whatever brightness setting you were using before, which is slightly annoying. You can set the monitor to automatically go to sleep or onto standby after a set amount of time. And I haven't actually tested this feature, but I believe it'll probably display a message on the screen, and if you press a button on the OSD it'll cancel it and it'll remain on, whereas if you don't it'll go to sleep as intended. Deep sleep. This is another energy saving function. If deep sleep is enabled, then it allows the monitor to be certified to very high Energy Star standards. But it can cause some issues if you do send your monitor to sleep and or you're switching input sometimes, in fact. Sometimes the monitor won't actually spring back to life if you've got deep sleep enabled, so you might want to disable that. I mean, I haven't had any issues myself, but I don't tend to send my monitor to sleep, so I haven't really tested this out much. And then there's a memory recall option, which will recall everything to the factory defaults. There's also a little, it looks like a battery indicator at the bottom. It's a power use indicator, similar to what you'll find on many Dell monitors, and that basically shows a reflection of the current relative power consumption of the monitor, and it basically reflects the brightness level you've got it set to. So if I reduce the brightness, as I would love to do because my retinas are burning right now, 100 is very bright on this monitor. So if I reduce that to my preferred brightness setting, you can see that reduces the relative power consumption, so it's now at 58% instead of 100. So it's interesting to see that even though you've set the brightness to 30, this doesn't just go to 30% because it's still, you know, it gives you a sort of relative power reduction of 42% instead. So that's a nice little feature. There's also just something that says the current refresh rate and resolution that the monitor is running at. So that was all there is to it, the OSD on-screen display menu system of the ViewSonic XG2703-GS. Be sure to check out the full review on PCmonitors.info.